परिहृत्य सदा चरणाम्बुरुहामृत शान्ति सुधा एव भृङ्गमनो भवरोगहरा
ॐ द्यौ शान्तिरन्तरिक्षं शान्ति पृथिवी शान्तिरापशान्तिरोषधयः शान्तिः वनस्पतयः शान्तिर्विश्वे देवाः शान्तिर्ब्रह्म शान्तिर्सर्वं शान्ति शान्तिरेव शान्तिः सा मा शान्तिरेधि ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः. The subject for the retreat is Karma Yoga, the pathway to happiness. So there are altogether 4 sessions. It's based on the 3rd chapter of the Gita. The 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad Gita deals with Karma Yoga. And is one of the most profound expositions of Karma Yoga anywhere in any of our traditional literature. Now we are trying to interpret this as a pathway, as a means for attaining contentment, happiness, peace and joy and so on. Now you find all the human endeavors, whether scientific, technological, or philosophical, have been different expressions of the human quest for happiness. It's clear? Yes. That's what you find, whether is a great seeker after truth like Galileo or Copernicus, or an adventurer like Columbus or Vasco da Gama, or a great industrialist like Henry Ford or Rockefeller. You find all these great men have been trying to pursue happiness in one form or other. It could be to push beyond the known levels of human knowledge, for Galileo, or maybe to find out new sea routes, new lands, new colonies, as in the case of Columbus, or maybe to increase industrial production, as in the case of somebody like Henry Ford. All these human activities have been one way or other expressions of man's eternal but highly elusive quest for happiness. Now, one very interesting and paradoxical aspect of this quest for happiness is it never comes to an end. The quest, the search for happiness is a continuous process, but it always remains eternally elusive. Happiness eludes human endeavors and human efforts. Maybe because it is so elusive, it continues. So this quest for happiness often takes the form of the quest for comfort, physical comfort. Then it actually ends in unhappiness, or maybe partial happiness, not complete happiness. Because this quest for happiness can give us more tools, more power to control external nature, so that we can increase our comforts. But that increase in comforts doesn't lead to real contentment. That's why I said it is elusive. Now, Karma Yoga is a very interesting subject in the Bhagavad Gita. It is based on the simple principle that what we do or how we do things influences or shapes our mind, our character, our destiny and our future. Not only what we do, but how we do, that's very important. In fact, in the psychology of Karma Yoga, how we do things is much more important than what we do. So normally our actions frequently forget certain fundamental principles and disciplines when we become obsessed with the result, with the purpose of our actions. Then what happens is, frequently our actions do not produce happiness. When we become too much obsessed or attached to the result, we forget the importance of what means we use, because we get over focused on what we want to achieve. So that makes this happiness as something eternally elusive. It always eludes our pursuit. Karma Yoga helps you to convert every activity we do, all our duties and responsibilities, not only pleasant duties and responsibilities, but even unpleasant duties and responsibilities, into effective means for creating real happiness. I use the word real happiness because normally when we use the word happiness, we normally mean, unfortunately, some kind of a temporary enjoyment. That's what we normally mean when we use the word happiness in normal conversation. But that temporary unhappiness is temporary, is impermanent. It is nothing but temporary absence of unhappiness, which implies that next moment this happiness may give way to unhappiness. But Karma Yoga, the psychology, the spiritual psychology behind Karma Yoga, provides a very effective tool, a psychological means, a psychological tool and a spiritual tool to do whatever we do into effective means for generating happiness. And generating happiness means generating spiritual energy, generating creative spiritual energy. And this is made possible by a slight readjustment in our perspective. As I mentioned earlier, great men and women who have achieved many great things, who have made great contribution to human civilization, human advancement of science and technology, the great inventors, the great discoverers, the great industrialists, who were not only seekers of profit but also were in many respects men of strong humanistic impulse, like Henry Ford and others, who did make a lot of profit but who did also have the comforts and the welfare of people in whatever way it means in their minds. So you find they all achieve great things, but we cannot always say that they really achieved happiness in the higher sense. I mean happiness which is not just a temporary absence of unhappiness. We can't say they achieved eternal contentment. And that contentment is possible only from another source of human endeavor, from spirituality, mysticism, religion, and also from literature, classical works, and so on, different levels of contentment. Now, coming back to the text, the third chapter of the Gita, which is a very interesting chapter. It analyzes the human psychology behind human activity. Now, Gita approaches the problem of action from four perspectives, four angles. One, at the lowest level, the absence of any action, which is contempt, which is considered to be the most undesirable thing by the teacher of the Gita. And Gita also tells you very clearly, even if a person boasts, even if he claims to be inactive, actually he is not inactive, because no one can keep quiet mentally and physically, even for a split second. Naki kasikshanam Jadu dishtati akarma krita karyadehi avashak karma sarva pragadijaihi gunaihi. There is a profound psychology of human activity enshrined in this very profound verse. What it says is, Nahi kasikshanam abhi jadu dishtati akarma krita. Nobody can keep quiet physically, mentally, intellectually, verbally, even for a split second. Even if you try to be inactive, your own nature, your own instinct, your own impulses will push you in one direction or other and force you to act. If you are physically inactive, mentally you will be hyperactive. Even if you sit in an easy chair, you cannot really claim that you are inactive. You are inactive at a physical level, but you are active at a mental level, thinking, contemplating, and so on. But at the same time, these actions, as I mentioned, do not generate spiritual energy. Karma Yoga is a technique of converting every human activity into a machine that produces, the manufactures spiritual energy, which converts physical energy into spiritual energy. How is this made possible? The same verse which I quoted says, even if you try to remain inactive, you cannot. You will be helpless. Karyadehi avashak karma. You are totally helpless. You will be forced to do something or other. So there is no inaction possible for anyone. At the same time, as I mentioned earlier, actions always produce some good results, but unfortunately also some unpleasant results, undesirable results. Our actions may produce results which are desirable for us, but may also produce results which are unpleasant to others around us. So we cannot say those actions are perfect. They are absolutely tools, they are absolutely useful means for producing universal good. You can't say, because when it produces good results for somebody, it also produces unpleasant results for somebody else. And when that also produces unhappiness, if not now, later. So can we convert, or how do we convert our human activity, human endeavor? Not only physical activity, a word we speak is a verbal activity, a thought we think is a psychological, a mental activity, a physical activity is obviously an activity. Well, how can we derive spiritual energy from our normal duties and responsibilities. Otherwise, we do certain things, and when the results are good, we are happy, and when the results are not good, we become unhappy. This is how life goes on. Happiness and unhappiness, pain and pleasure, profit and loss, good and bad, pleasant and unpleasant. So we become like boats tossed over the mighty waves of the currents of our own karma, helpless, tiny boats tossed over the mighty waves. Now, Karma Yoga helps you to take a different perspective towards our actions, so that even if we do not get the expected results, even if we always do not get the desirable results, even if we get sometimes unpleasant results, still we will not be unhappy. So it can help us to avoid being unhappy any time in our life by lifting our perspective. When we look at everything from the ordinary worldly point of view, it is impossible to be always contented and happy, because at the worldly level, actions produce good results and also unpleasant results, as I mentioned. But suppose we lift our perspective to a higher level and learn to look at our actions and the results from a higher perspective, then we will be able to look at failure, we look at unpleasant results also with the same equanimity of mind with which we look at pleasant results. Because our interpretation of happiness undergoes a complete transformation. We lift the level of our perspective from empirical to spiritual perspective. From a spiritual perspective, we will be able to look at pain and pleasure, failure and success, good and bad with the same equanimity of mind. We should know very well that this doesn't mean any kind of insensitivity, any kind of negligence or indifference to action or result. Rather, it is just a way of looking at our actions and the results. And I want to add one important point in this context. All the greatest spiritual teachers who have made contributions which are much more everlasting than a Henry Ford or a Galileo or a Copernicus, a man like Buddha or a Christ or a Shankaracharya or Sri Ramakrishna or a Vivekananda, or take any great spiritual teacher the world has produced, who taught certain great values which make our life livable. Even when this terrible pandemic is threatening humanity today, we turn to their teachings. What I mentioned here in the Gita, the Vedic mantras are there. I mentioned it's like Dev Shanti, Antariksham Shanti, Prithvi Shanti, Rapa Shanti, Roshadaya Shanti, etc. Let there be peace and happiness and joy and prosperity and tranquility and purity in the mountains, the valleys, rivers, forests, earths, skies, everywhere. It's an ancient prayer from Vedas. Now here you find a prayer addressed to God for filling the world with peace and happiness. That peace and happiness cannot be generated or created by the contributions of a Galileo or a Copernicus or a Columbus. That peace and happiness, that's what we are turning towards today in this 21st century, when all the mighty contributions of science and technology have only made human life more and more unbearable. Not because science is bad or technology is bad, and not because the great scientists who made great discoveries were wrong, but because humanity did not know how to make proper use of the gifts of nature, of the contributions of science and technology. The education, which means getting truly educated, the education we can get only from the teachings of these great spiritual teachers. Now, they were all men and women who were very successful in their life. Can you ever imagine a man who is more successful than Buddha? Can you ever mention a single industrialist, a single CEO of a company, the most successful profit-making CEO of a company? Can you compare him with a Buddha? Buddha's empire continues to exist in the minds of millions of people all over the world because he renounced a kingdom, renounced an empire, and he decided to become a beggar. A beggar, a spiritual beggar, a spiritual seeker. Beggar in the sense he became a monk, he became a mendicant, he became a seeker of spiritual truth. I don't think any industrial captain can claim 1/1000th of the success of a Buddha or a Shankaracharya or a Christ, because what they achieved continues to exist and continues to be relevant 2000 years, 2500 years after their passing away, and the relevance of the teachings and the meaningfulness of the inspiration they gave to us continue to increase more and more. Their stature continues to increase more and more. You cannot say that about a Galileo or a Copernicus or a Henry Ford. So, what I want to say, these great spiritual teachers were archetypal practitioners of Karma Yoga. They were always successful and they were always happy. They were among the happiest men the world has seen. They were among the happiest men and women humanity has produced, because they did great things, and what they did continues to be relevant today, continues to be practical today, and continues to be a source of inspiration today, 2000 years after their passing away. So, Karma Yoga doesn't mean indifference to failure or indifference to duty, not at all. Karma Yoga only means doing our everyday work from a different perspective, from a higher perspective. So Gita analyzes Karma Yoga in this from 4 different angles, as I mentioned earlier. One is inactivity, which is contempt, which is impossible for anyone. The second level of karma or activity is what you call in Sanskrit sakama karma. It's always better to do something with a strong motive, if you can't help it, with a strong selfish motive, than doing nothing for anybody in the world. Than doing nothing. So doing nothing is the most undesirable thing. And doing something good with some strong purpose. Maybe you may have a selfish motive in making a donation, making a contribution to help the people suffering from natural calamities in some other places. You may want to be known as a philanthropist. Still, for doing that, you are doing something good, you make a contribution. That is called sakama karma. So, better to do something good. If you can do it only with a selfish motive, okay, do it for the good of humanity. But doing nothing is the most despicable thing. The third level of karma is karma yoga. Doing something noble, something good for the humanity without a selfish motive. That's what the Buddha, Christ and others did. Or Gandhi, modern times, or Vivekananda. So examples. Many. In fact, the great commentator of Gita, Lord Sri Shankaracharya, who actually is responsible for making Gita available to us today as a universal spiritual classic, he himself was an archetypal example of karma yogi. The greatest philosopher India has seen, if not maybe the greatest devotion poet, the greatest organizer of 10 religious orders, 4 important monasteries, builder of hundreds of temples, and he is known as the greatest champion of Vedanta, arguably the greatest man who ever wrote a sentence or a verse in Sanskrit in Indian history. That man was one of the most intellectual specimens of humanity, but he was also one of the most active persons known to humanity. He did all this within 32 years. So, he did all this without a selfish purpose. That is an example of karma yoga. So, this is the third stage. The fourth stage of karma yoga is being established the natural habit of doing good for others without any selfish motive. Even it becomes your natural habit. Karma yoga nishtha is called. All these great spiritual teachers were examples of this nishtha, this karma yoga, in its most sublime aspects. So, what I mean to say, karma yoga is not the first alternative taught in the Gita. When the disciple Arjuna became inactive, lazy, deluded, and tried to run away from his duties and responsibilities, Lord Krishna first taught him the important message of doing his duty with a definite motive, because that's always better than doing nothing. But then the point is that will not bring you happiness. To get real happiness is called contentment. One should be able to do one's duties and responsibilities. Whatever we do, this karma yoga can be practiced any day, any moment for anyone. You may be working in a factory, in an office, in a university, in a hospital, whatever may be your job, no matter what job is. In fact, the student in the Gita was a soldier and not a saint sitting under a tree in the forest. He was a man of action. He was faced with this problem of this, the pricking of consciousness. So he wanted to get certain questions clarified by the teacher. So he was not a contemplative person, Arjuna. Arjuna was a man of action. So karma yoga was taught to a person who was essentially a man of action. But karma yoga implies the art of combining action with contemplation. That is the uniqueness of karma yoga. How do we combine contemplation with action? To begin with, we should remember happiness that we are talking about is not something that we get from an external source. One of our own Ayurvedic texts contains a verse which tells us that real physical and psychological health is our own natural state of body and mind. Samadosha samaknischa samadhatu malakriyaha prasanna atmendriya managa sustha iti abhidhiyate. Sustha means a man whose mind is in friendly terms with himself, or who is in friendly terms with his own mind. Man of perfect mental health, psychological health, and whose body is not complaining to him. When our body is unhealthy, it begins to complain. It begins to tell us, well, I'm here. If you have any health, physical, any problem of physical health, the body will immediately remind you, well, here, I'm here. Suppose your body doesn't complain, it means you are not aware of your body, and that is the most wonderful state of physical health. So also when your mind doesn't complain by becoming anxious or worried, then that is the most wonderful state of mental health. So Sushruta, who is the author of this verse, Sushruta Sutra, says, when our metabolism, the physical system is in a state of perfect equilibrium, and when our mind and body are already in a state of prasanna means natural state of health and joy and lightness. When you reach that level of physical and mental health, you are considered to be a healthy person, and that is our natural state. Disease is something alien to us. So also unhappiness is something alien to us. Vedanta tells you that our true nature is Satchidananda, Atman. Our true identity is Atman. Our true identity is the universal self, which is all pervading, which is essentially of the nature of blissfulness, of knowledge and existence. So this blissfulness is our true nature. That's our home. That's where we belong to. That's our true identity. So blissfulness is nothing but the most sublime aspect of happiness. When happiness becomes our natural state of mind, it is called blissfulness. In modern times, you can say, one of the greatest spiritual teachers 19th century has seen was Sri Ramakrishna. He was the greatest example of happiness in his most sublime and spiritual sense. So we should remember, happiness is not something that we have to create or manufacture, attain or obtain. We should get back to our own home. We should reconnect with our own true identity, our own true nature. Then we become happy. And in one of our Upanishads, in the Ishavasya Upanishad, there is a statement, of course, after teaching the highest spiritual philosophy of the all-pervading nature of Atman or God, the next verse tells us how to practice this highest spiritual philosophy in our everyday life, in our everyday activity. Kurvanne veha karmani jivisheshatam samaha evam tuin anyathe dosti na karma lippede nare. Something very interesting. This Sanskrit verse I need not bother, as I explained. The verse tells you, live in this world, be always active, do your work, and you can desire for a long life of 100 years. But remember, we should not live in this world as a worldly minded person. We should remember everything is pervaded by one divine spirit. Once we keep that in mind, we can be happy even in the midst of our everyday activity. Another important point that you will understand, this happens to us through this process of evolution. I can try to explain this in the light of certain ancient Upanishadic statements. In the Gita itself, the 6th chapter, Arjuna is asking a question, the disciple. The question is, after having listened to this Karma Yoga and other teachings, how to practice, after fully listening to Krishna's exposition of Karma Yoga, how to do our duties and responsibilities without selfish motive, how to convert every activity into a spiritual activity, how to spiritualize or every micro moment, every activity, every thought, every word, Arjuna had a big question. So he asked this question, suppose I do not fully succeed in doing this in one life, what is going to happen to me? Then Krishna tells Arjuna, you can practice this karma yoga as best as you can, and if you do not succeed in one life, you are not losing anything, you won't miss anything. You will be born again and you will continue your spiritual journey from where you have left in this life. Now that is something very interesting. Tatradam buddhisam yogam labhade paurodekikam yatade charato bhuyasam siddho kurudantana. The Gita verse tells us that even if we try to practice, even if we do not succeed in practicing karma yoga, even if we try to practice karma yoga, then even that attempt to practice, even if it is not fully successful, the attempt to practice itself will produce spiritual benefits. That's why we feel when we do something good, let's say helping somebody to cross the street, or doing some kind of help to somebody, you find a great lightness, a great contentment of mind. We feel very comfortable with our own mind. We feel a strange kind of joy. Oh, I have done something good. That action may not have been very pleasant, but still that action, good action, without a selfish motive, helping somebody, even if you go to a nearby temple or a church and clean the place, or if you, in these modern times of this pandemic, if you try to get maybe some help as a volunteer, helping old age homes or people who are affected by this pandemic, you feel, after that you feel a great sense of contentment and happiness. The slightest bit of even an attempt to do karma yoga, to practice karma yoga, will produce a strange inner feeling of contentment. That's because it produces spiritual energy. So Gita tells us that even if you do not succeed in this life, Gita believes in reincarnation and love doctrine of karma yoga. In next life, you'll be able to continue your spiritual journey. You find this in one of our Upanishadic texts, for example. Well, I won't go into the whole of the story. We are holding many classes on this subject right now, every alternate Saturday. It's from Kathopanishad. There, a boy is asking for 3 boons when it's a mythological context, but the story has got a tremendous message. A little boy and his teacher, there's a dialogue and a conversation between Nachiketa and Yama, the student and the teacher. The teacher asked his student, the little boy, you can ask for 3 boons. The first boon that he asked for is for happy family life. The second boon that he is asking for is a continuation of this happy life in the hereafter. Now you find this human evolution you find here. At the beginning of our life, we may perhaps think that happiness can be produced, happiness can be attained by making physical life comfortable. But then, as we evolve, we realize that even the happiest man in this world may not be the happiest, because he may be thinking of what happens to him after death. So Nachiketa is asking for the second boon. He wants to enjoy comforts in heaven. the third boon that he asked for, because he was not contented, he was not satisfied with the second boon, is asking for the eternal spiritual message, the eternal spiritual wisdom. So without getting spiritual wisdom, we cannot be really happy. So real happiness comes from spiritual wisdom. And in this pursuit of happiness, the most important and maybe the first primary step is to give a promotion to our ego. Because when we do our work, when we do our duties and responsibilities, we normally every person will have a lot of desires, motivations, goals, a certain deadline, certain things to be achieved. That's common for everyone. Gita never tells us, as I mentioned earlier, Gita never tells us to practice karma yoga all of a sudden. Suppose you are an employee in a company, you're working hard 15 hours a day, you're on definite goals to be achieved, definite program, this schedule, all these things are there. You cannot just practice karma yoga without a more selfish motive. It is not possible. So Gita does not ask you to do that. What it tells you to do is slowly to reach a point where you will automatically be disciplined and successful. Still, you will be looking at your work and its result from a higher perspective, so that if the results are not exactly up to your expectation, it will not be a shock to you. That is the psychological message of karma yoga. This is a very important point to remember. So the point is, Gita does not ask us to practice karma yoga all of a sudden. In fact, Lord Krishna, with a profound spiritual insight, psychological insight, tells us, Na buddhivedam janiyed ajnanam karma sanginam. Suppose a student is working hard to get the highest result, or an employee is working hard to get his results, to attain his set goals. He cannot ask that person, oh, you should not have any purpose in your life and activity. That's not what karma yoga means, not at all. Karma yoga means combining the efficiency of a successful CEO, combining the drive, the enthusiasm, the dynamism of a successful man of action with the spiritual wisdom of a sage. That is what karma yoga really implies. So the examples for archetypal karma yogins that Gita quotes are not the examples of prophets and sages and saints, but of kings and emperors. That's something very interesting. In the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna gives certain examples of great men and women who practiced karma yoga, who were the most archetypal practitioners of karma yoga. Those great men and women were not saints and monks and nuns. They were great kings and emperors. So the art of combining action and contemplation is technically called Rajarshi Dharma. It means the way of a philosopher king. That's how I can translate this. The way of a philosopher king. A king, in the sense, he is very active. He is running a big kingdom or an empire. A lot of work to do, a lot of efficiency, dynamism are required. At the same time, he is not a ruthless dictator. He is not a worldly minded predator. But he is calm and quiet like a sage. Such a person is called Rajarshi. So we should always remember, whenever we have any doubt, whenever we have some confusion in understanding the spiritual psychology of karma yoga, we should remember the examples of karma yogins that Gita refers to were Janaka and other great kings and emperors of ancient times. And not only that, the term, as I mentioned, is Rajarshi. And Lord Krishna himself says, this path of Karma Yoga, this path of obtaining happiness and contentment by spiritualizing every activity in our life, every obligation in our life, every duty in our life, including every unpleasant duty and every unpleasant obligation to our life, into spiritual activity. By combining action and contemplation, this ideal of life was developed and evolved by a succession of great men who were ruling monarchs and who were also as contemplative, as wise, as philosophical as sages. So imam vivasude yogam pratavanaham avyam vivaswan manave praha manu ikshakave abravit evam parampara praptam imam rajasya viduhu sakalena mahata yogo nashta parandava. You can find these two verses in the beginning of the 4th chapter of the Gita. After teaching Karma Yoga, Lord Krishna tells, look here, Arjuna, this Karma Yoga was not necessarily confined or practiced by sages and prophets and epoch makers like Buddha or Christ, but they were actively practiced in ancient India by ruling monarchs, emperors and kings. That's why it's called Rajarshi Dharma. So Raja means king and Rishi means sage or saint. So some of the commentators mentioned Rajattum, Aishwarya Sambhati, Rishittum, Tasyaha, Sukshmartha, Darsana, Kshamattum. What it means is, the status of a king means a lot of wealth, lot of success, lot of dynamism, lot of efficiency, lot of drive, a lot of success in their undertakings. Rishittum, Tasyaha, Sukshmartha, Darsana, Kshamattum. The Rishi, this philosopher, the sage is a person who approves the need for success, who appreciates and approves the need for worldly activities, efficiency and so on. But at the same time, who is aware of their limitation. The sage or the philosopher understands that worldly success cannot give you eternal happiness. It can give you only temporary absence of unhappiness. And that temporary absence of unhappiness is not something very desirable, because it essentially implies the possibility of unhappiness immediately after this happy experience. That is something that nobody wants. So, the sage realizes that worldly success, duties and obligations, efficiency and drive and push and enthusiasm are good, but they are not enough. They contain within them the seeds for potential unhappiness. They can become a source of happiness when the success and achievement are supplemented and refined and spiritually enriched by a deep understanding of their limitation. That is the real meaning of the Sanskrit explanation. Means Tasyaha Sukshmartha Darsana Kshamattu. A sage has got the subtle insight to see through the limitations of worldly success. So he understands success is necessary but not enough. So he practices a kind of non-attachment. He becomes less obsessed. He becomes less attached, less blindly attached to the result, so that he takes care of the means also. So when you start taking care of the means, as much as you take care of the goal to be achieved, then you are a karma yogi. So taking care of the means as well as taking care of the ends together. The philosophical insight gives us the wisdom to handle and make proper use of success, so that we will be able to happy after the success. If we do not take proper care of the means to handle success, then what happens? Success can be only prelude to unhappiness. So real happiness comes when we combine action and contemplation without any mutual friction or conflict. Real karma yoga is nothing but the art of combining action and contemplation without any friction, without any conflict. Action helps us to live in this world and take care of our duties and responsibilities, take care of our obligations in the family, in the workplace, in society, and also as an ideal citizen. And contemplation helps us by giving a knowledge, by giving an idea of how to handle our success, how to handle prosperity, how to handle the gifts of science and technology, the gifts of nature. Now we will have interaction for half an hour, and then we'll continue the session this evening at 7 p.m. We'll continue the discussion. You are most welcome to ask questions as mentioned earlier. Thank you. Namaskar.
Thank you, Maharaj. There is a raise your hand button on Zoom, or you can also type it in YouTube. And then whoever is ready, I will allow you to ask the question yourself. The question, Yogesh, you had a question. You want to go ahead and ask yours?
Can you hear me, Sanjay?
Yeah, good.
Ram Swamiji. Sorry, there is a little bit of noise behind me. Oh, Sanjay, why don't you ask your question first? I'll ask later.
Sure. Maharaj, my question is, there are most of the time it is a response that is required than a proactive action. And the response many a times is to an unpleasant situation where you have conflict, like the way Arjuna faced. There is an unpleasant situation. In our own daily life, when we have an unpleasant situation where you have to respond, how do we process that? Sometimes it says, I'll be quiet when there is injustice happening. I don't care, their karma. So should we act when when you perceive injustice, or we don't know whether it's injustice? How do we handle that dilemma?
Oh, and two types of responses I understand. One is our response to respond to our own duties, our own obligations, and the response to social injustices which are not within the purview of our own obligations. So, two types of responses. Well, the first one is this one. I mean, let's address the first one. Suppose you have to respond to a situation which is within the sphere of your own obligations and professional duties or responsibilities, then you should act considering it as your swadharma. So the word swadharma comes in this context. Swadharma is a very unique concept where there are certain things that we are expected to do, we are supposed to do. The society expects us to do. Suppose you are a doctor, you have to treat the patient, you are a teacher, you have to teach, like that, depending upon your status, obligation, social responsibility, family responsibility, and so on. So that is swadharma. It's a very wide concept, but it is very simple. Swadharma in the context of family, swadharma in the context of society, swadharma in the context of country, and so on. if it is part of it, if the demand for response is coming from within the sphere of your own obligations, then you should act as a dharma. But if it is come from an external source, say for example there may be a human rights violation problem in some distant countries, or maybe ecological pollution and water pollution, air pollution is becoming a global threat, let us say even this pandemic and so on. That is a different kind of challenge. There what we can do, we can spread awareness of these problems among people, and then create more awareness of this problem. That's all we can do. That's all we are expected to do. There are certain things that we may want to respond to, but it is neither our obligation nor within our power to do that. But there are certain duties and obligations which are within our power, within our responsibility, that we have to respond to as a dharma. That's right.
Okay.
Yeah. If it is from your job, for example, then it is a dharma. If it is something that is related to some global problem, people, I've seen people becoming extremely emotional reading some newspaper, headlines and things like that. Well, that is good. There also dharma may be limited to creating awareness of the problem we are talking about. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Any other questions? You can type it.
I can go next, Sanjay, if that's okay.
Go ahead.
Yes, Swamiji had a question. So one of the things that is taught in Karma Yoga is to offer our results to God. And many times what we find is we do something, or at the end of the day we offer the results to God, but then the very next moment or the next day you find yourself worrying about money or family, right? So this can create a conflict in the mind that we are not doing Karma Yoga sincerely. How should one deal with that conflict as they begin to practice Karma Yoga?
Yeah, but I want to tell you in this context, for an householder or a normal citizen of a country or a member of a family, a member of society, generating wealth for the maintenance and prosperity of the family members is sadharma. That's important. You should remember that very well. So, frequently there is a wrong notion that a desire for money is something evil. Not necessarily. Greed is evil. But your efforts, your desire to generate money for maintaining, for looking after your family or looking after your obligations in society and family, there is nothing wrong in it. Vedanta doesn't say that it is wrong. Not only that, you'll be surprised. Some of us Smriti texts which actually enrich and reinforce Vedanta teachings tell you, for an householder to practice renunciation, external renunciation, it is wrong. If an householder who has a lot of family obligations, lot of needs, I suppose he says money is bad, so I won't generate money, he's actually practicing adharma. We should always remember such teachings you find in Buddhism. We should know that Buddhism was essentially a teaching meant for mendicants. Buddhism in its original form, for the most part, was addressed to monks. In fact, in Dhammapada, if you read, or many of Buddha's discourses, he is addressing bhikkhu. Bhikkhu in Pali means monks. So in Buddhist teachings and Jaina's teachings you find such expressions that one should not have any desire for money, wealth, etc. For householders, a desire for wealth and success for looking after families, obligations and duties, it is dharma. There are strong statements in this Vedic literature which says an householder who is lazy, who doesn't work to generate wealth, to look after his families and his children, he is an adharmi. That's it. He is as much as an adharmi as a monk who generates wealth. You follow the point? For a monk, for mendicants, effort to generate wealth is not good. For a householder, to neglect the duties to generate wealth, for looking after family obligations, looking after children, so that negligence is wrong. They should generate wealth for the uplift of, for the benefit of for the maintaining families, social obligations, and so on. So we should not get away with the impression that it is wrong for an householder to have a desire for material wealth. Householder, it is needed, it is a must.
Thank you, Swamiji.
Yeah.
Let me look for questions on YouTube if there are any. Go ahead. That was this question. Why was the importance?
Yeah.
Sanjay, I'm not sure if Swamiji heard the question.
I did not hear. No. I did not hear the question.
Srinivas, can you repeat the question, please?
Yeah.
Can you please confirm first if Swamiji can hear you?
I didn't hear. Yeah.
Now, yes. Go ahead, Srinivas.
We can't hear you, Srinivas.
No, couldn't hear.
No, we can't hear you. We can't hear the question on our end. Sanjay, can you repeat the question for us?
You know,
Yeah, I think Swamiji, if you can hear me, I can try to summarize the question. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Yeah.
I think the question was that this person has done some research on the commonality between Abraham and Rajarshis, and his question is, why is there so much...
Excuse me, Rajarshi, before that what did you say?
Abraham is the word I used.
Abraham.
Yeah, and the question was, why is there so much importance being placed on the discussion of Rajarshis in religion or in religious scriptures?
Oh yeah, one important point is, in the Gita itself, the commentators mentioned many times, spirituality is something that could be practiced in the most obviously secular setting. You see, how a king can practice renunciation even while doing his duties as a king. So in the Gita is something very interesting. In the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad also, there are long discussions between Janaka, who was a philosopher king or Rajarshi, and Yajnavalkya, who was a sage. So you find very interesting discussions. So It is the Vedic spirituality was so universal, and it emphasized the idea that real spirituality could be practiced by people who are not obviously engaged in spiritual pursuits in their everyday life. A king, for example, he has to do a lot of work. How can a king practice spirituality? Look at Plato's Republic, he's a philosopher king. He said the most ideal setting for any nation is to have a king who is also a philosopher. Because if a king is a philosopher, he will be a very wise king. And a philosopher, if he has got kingly pursuits, he will be able to enforce and implement some of his higher ideas in social, national life. So that's why this is emphasized in Gita tradition. I think in Abrahamic tradition, perhaps it is not so emphasized, but in Plato's discourse in Republic, you find the most ideal state for a country is to have a philosopher king. Philosophy doesn't mean necessarily a sage or a monk or anything. Philosopher is a person who has got a higher perspective, who is a wise person, who is a man or woman of wisdom. And wisdom means universal, even-minded, balanced outlook towards everything, towards values, towards duties and responsibilities, without any lopsidedness, without any tilt in one direction or other. So a king should be a wise person. In the sense, he should be even-minded. Actually, only a person with a philosopher's outlook, is a kind of transcendental outlook, looks beyond empirical things, who looks at higher things, looks at worldly obligations from a higher perspective. Only such a person will be an ideal administrator, ideal ruler. You can find some of the greatest statesmen the world has produced. There was little bit of that aspect of a philosopher king, Rajarshi, the great statesman, real statesmen, who have worked through their administrative responsibilities, diplomatic responsibilities, with a higher wisdom, with a balanced outlook, the universal outlook. That's called statesmanship, which contains an aspect of a philosopher king. Rajarshi.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
There is one more question on YouTube.
Yeah.
The Gita assumes a certain level of self-awareness and maturity to understand and benefit from its teaching.
Yeah.
In the initial stages, how can one develop this minimum level of qualities and how to do this?
Yeah, that's true. So Gita, the uniqueness of Gita is, it comes down to every woman's door, and it tells you how your everyday duties, no matter what those duties could be, can be given a higher orientation. You don't find that in any of the other Vedantic literature, like Upanishads and other books, which are so transcendental in their outlook. But Gita, say for example, Pashyan, Sunnan, Spusan, Jignan, Lavan, Visrijan, Kirnan, Unmishan, Nimishan, Navi, but you find that, and I won't quote too many. What I mean says, whatever you do, your everyday activity, your everyday duties and responsibilities, whether you are a housewife, whether you are a teacher, whether you are a professional, whatever may be a job, do that as Swadharma. What is Swadharma? This work has come to me. I have not gone in search of that work. This work has come to me. by virtue of my qualifications, by virtue of my obligations and standing in society. This is my duty. So I should do to the best of my ability. And to do it to the best of my ability is my way of justifying my existence. And it's our natural karma. When you look at your duties as your swadharma, you will not have any conflict. I think this is possible for everyone. Here in this context of swadharma, Gita doesn't tell you that you should necessarily turn to God and pray. If you can mentally offer all your work as an offering to the Lord, as a flower you place on the altar, that is wonderful. But the point is, this attitude is very important. Doing everything with a sense of sanctity and sacredness. It's my obligation, it's my sacred duty, it's my sacred responsibility. It becomes swadharma. It is your path. So when you are following your path, you cannot distract yourself from your road, from your trail, and going to another man's road. You will be distracted. You will not reach your goal. So you steadily follow your own chosen path with tenacity of purpose. So that is possible for everyone. A doctor, his royal highway is the job of a doctor. A student, even if he looks upon his studies as a sacred swadharma, that will give him success as a student, but that also will give him a kind of inner contentment. And this actually helps you to conserve your energy, really speaking. So dharma ideal helps you to conserve your energy, which otherwise will be distracted. So it comes down to the most ordinary common person. And once you start practicing swadharma, then your mind will naturally develop a unique kind of spiritual common sense. And that is the minimum qualification you are talking about. Karma yoga is the most simple and most direct. In bhakti yoga, raja yoga and jnana yoga, there are certain important disciplines you have to follow. But in karma yoga, all that you have to do is do it as a swadharma, as a sacred duty. Actually, when we change the attitude with which we do our everyday work, you find your mind also starts evolving. If you bringing a spiritual element into whatever we do every day, you find it will have an impact on the mind. The mind will become more and more calm and quiet and contemplative when you do it as swadharma. We come across many such people who have done this. Look at a man like Gandhi. See, Gandhiji was, if you look at Gandhi's life, his story, the story of a man who started as a very, very ordinary person, and he rose to that high level of a great practitioner of karma yoga. Just because you find his anasakti yoga, he did everything that he did as swadharma. He could not do all of a sudden, but he had this sense of sacredness that anyone can practice.
Okay, Maharaj, there are a few questions coming up. Saugata, you want to ask your question? Are you there, Saugata? Okay, the question was, Maharaj, happiness is a relative concept. You cannot have it without the opposite, that is unhappiness.
Yeah.
Which means you're seeking happiness, then you're already in unhappiness.
Yeah.
But when you are in happiness, you will not know that unless there is reference you can compare it with. So unhappiness is must to appreciate happiness. This logic is terrible because it causes a loop. So what is the wrong with this logic? The whole concept of cycle.
Yeah. Okay, now you are right. Buddha in Dharmapada, there is a 15th chapter of Dharmapada is Sukha Vagga, means chapter on Sukha. So you find. He uses the word Sukha, with Sanskrit, Pali slightly different, 15th chapter of Dharmapada. He said 12 verses are there in Pali which expound Sukha means happiness. That's one thing. And also in the Gita you find the same idea is expressed. Sukham atindriyam yetad buddhigrahim atindriyam. There also happiness, Sukha is used, and he says that kind of happiness which is beyond sensory perception, which is beyond mind, that is the absolute transcendental happiness, atyandikam sukham. That can be achieved only by the practice of yoga, karma yoga, bhakti yoga, and so on. Now there, the happiness that you attain through karma yoga is not happiness which is just one side of the coin, the other side being unhappiness. No, that is different. That is called contentment. So the Sanskrit also has got the word santosha, contentment. So contentment is something. So it is something which is more eternal. It is not the absence of unhappiness. Contentment, along with happiness, it also includes the ability to look upon unhappiness with the same equanimity of mind. So that is contentment. So if you are going, if you are using the English language, then you can say contentment is the real English translation for Sukham as mentioned in the Gita or the Dhammapada. That is contentment. The contentment is a state of our consciousness. It is not a temporary feeling of satisfaction. It is a state of consciousness, which on the one hand is contented, but it also is able to look upon the opposite of it with the same equanimity of mind without being affected by it. This is what really I mentioned earlier, when you do something good for others, when you do something noble and good, that is satisfactory, that gives you contentment. It's called Chitta Prasada. Prasada is used in the Gita, and Chitta Prasada is a term used in yoga. A tremendous feeling of inner enrichment, mind becoming full and filled. That is not the absence of unhappiness. It is something that by itself is self-fulfilling. So that is to be understood. So happiness, when you go to an English dictionary, the word happiness has got a very limited meaning. But that's not exactly what is implied in the Gita verse, please remember. Okay.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Yeah.
Suma Singh, do you want to ask your question?
Yes. Can you hear me, Swamiji?
Yeah, I can hear.
Okay. Something you just said in your previous answer may have answered my question also. But sometimes, like you say, when we do good actions, they have good results for some people, and for other people, that action I did may produce a bad outcome. So my question was, how can I reconcile myself when something that I do with a good intent may create some negativity for somebody else? Maybe they feel upset by something I did, or then I will feel unhappy, sad, disappointed, and guilty. How do I reconcile myself to these?
The Swadharma ideal. The Swadharma ideal is the real answer to this. Without that strong ideal, you will not be able to either enjoy contentment or go about your duties. Because something that brings joy to you, something that brings success to you, something that brings prosperity to you, may bring tremendous misery to others. But that is not your problem, really speaking. So this could happen. You can find this in all spheres of life. So you cannot do anything which will bring joy for everyone in the world. I mean, in the normal life situations.
Normal things.
In normal life situations. Of course, the great spiritual teachers did things that were good for the whole humanity. But even then, we know Jesus Christ did not bring joy to the Pharisees and Sadducees. They wanted him to be crucified. And Buddha had his own enemies. So you find all the greatest of spiritual teachers also made some of their contemporary people unhappy. Not because they did anything bad for them, but because their doing good for the whole humanity made their enemies unhappy, for which they are not responsible. So that is true of even the greatest men and women the world has produced. And that is much more true of everyone in this world. So one of our contemporary, one Swami of old generation mentioned, if anyone is struggling to make everyone happy, either he is a crook or he is a saint. Suppose somebody is struggling to make everyone happy, he is either a crook or a saint. A saint will try to make everyone happy because he doesn't hate anyone. You don't hate anyone. So naturally you are doing something that you believe will make everyone happy. But somebody deliberately trying to make everyone happy, he is not a very desirable type of person. So that's a very important point to remember. It is impossible for anyone to make everyone happy in the world, but it is possible for one to do things in such a way that he brings inner contentment to himself, and he brings joy and contentment for a large number of people. Okay, that's all we can do.
There are a few questions, Maharaj.
Yeah.
There's one from YouTube. How does Karma Yoga apply to thought and words besides actions?
Thoughts and words, yeah, right. So when we start trying to practice Karma Yoga, accordingly our mind also begins to move and evolve. Just as our mind influences our actions also influence the mind. Actions leave in our minds some strong marks and impulses. Actions, we cannot do anything without simultaneously affecting our mind. So anyone who is trying to practice Karma Yoga will find slowly you are becoming calm and quiet because you are not affected. You don't hate anyone. You don't try to do anything harmful to anyone. So you feel you doing everything for the good of yourself to the best of your ability. So that approach itself brings an element of tranquility and peace to yourself, really speaking. That is the first thing that happens. Anyone who takes to this path, he begins to enjoy a kind of inner peace, which in its most exalted form can be called Chitta Prasada. I mean the inner tranquility of mind. So, and that influences the words also. When mind becomes calm and quiet, you are in perfectly good terms with your own mind, then your words also become automatically disciplined, refined. It's not external refinement or diplomacy, not at all. But when our mind becomes calm and quiet, our thoughts also become tranquil and peaceful, and then our words also will be simultaneously affected. That's what happens. They function together, they don't function in isolated compartments.
Thank you, Maharaj. Mark Goodrich, you want to ask your question?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, Swamiji?
Yeah, I can hear. Yeah.
Okay. This is maybe a little bit off the subject, but I'm going to go ahead and ask anyway. In a lot of the Vedantic texts that I read, it is stated that the world is illusory or unreal. And if it is, why should we strive to find success in our worldly lives? I'll just, kind of summarize. But the philosophy of Vedanta that says the world is illusory or unreal is hard for me to understand.
Yeah, please remember now, first of all, I must begin by making this is a problem of language or translation. Vedanta doesn't tell you the world is unreal or the world is illusory. When it uses the world is unreal, what it means is it is not absolutely real. And not absolutely real means it is subject to changes. See, you have to remember, if Vedanta, Advaita Vedanta, even yesterday, we had regular classes. I am teaching a group in India on this Mandukya Bhashya, Shankaracharya's Bhashya. Come and see. Shankaracharya emphatically says this world is not absolutely unreal. What he says is this world is only relative. The word mithya, that's a word used, that is frequently translated as unreal in English language. That's because its real translation should be relative. In Vedanta, what is unreal, what is absolutely unreal, is something that cannot be even conceived of. What is unreal, the example for the absolute unreality is like a flower in a garden or flower in the sky or the horn of a hare. These are the examples given for things which are absolutely unreal, which even if you utter the word, it is mutually contradictory. The fact that it cannot be even conceived of becomes obvious. The world is not like that. The world is real and is the only reality till we realize the fact that Brahman is absolutely real. Before we realize Brahman as absolute reality, the world should be taken as real. And then you should practice in this world karma yoga, you should practice contemplation, meditation, all the spiritual practices. You should do your best to do your duties and responsibilities, and you should do that without a selfish motive, doing everything as an offering to the Lord. Then one day you will understand, you will really experience the empirical nature, the non-eternal nature, the relativity of this world. At that time, you understand Brahman, which is the only transcendental reality, is Paramarthika Satta, the absolute reality. So please remember, whenever Vedantic texts tell you, Shankaracharya's texts tell you that the world is unreal, what it means is it is not absolutely real. And in Vedanta, to be called absolutely real, it should remain the same in the past, present and future. Anything that changes in the past, present and future, anything that belongs to time and space cannot be real in the absolute sense, can be real only in the relative sense, so it is relativity. So this world, even this earth or the universe we are talking about, you cannot before Big Bang, this world was not like this. Maybe if you believe in Big Crunch, maybe after some millions of years, the shape of the world may change. And several millions of years earlier, the world was different. So, everything is changing. So, anything that is changing is not absolutely real, but it is not absolutely unreal. It is only relative. So, please remember, there is always a problem of language. And this is frequently a problem we have to address in all the classes that we give in Vedanta. Because not only here, but even in India, people who write books on Vedanta in English language without studying the original scriptures, they create this problem. Swami Vivekananda was the first great Indian saint who corrected the wrong translation of the word mithya into illusion. And Swami Vivekananda corrected the wrong translation in his London lectures. He says, by mithya we don't mean illusion, it means relative. When Vedantic texts tell you that the world is unreal, it only means it is not absolutely real. And to be absolutely real is to remain the same without any change in the past, present and future. Nothing in this world remains the same for billions of years. It changes, in fact. So, please remember, unreal, when somebody says the world is unreal, it means it is only relative. Second point, dream. There is a great difference between dream and waking state in Vedanta. But both are equally unreal from the highest standpoint, absolute standpoint. But at their level there is a difference. There is a fundamental differences. So these subjects are discussed in Shankaracharya's commentary very elaborately. But frequently, what happens? A number of translations come all over India. In India also this is very common. Many I have to correct on many occasions people who try to base their understanding of Vedanta on wrong translations. So I would recommend that you read translations by Dr. Radhakrishnan, Swami Vivekananda, and some of the great authentic scholars who studied the original books of Shankaracharya, who have translated into English. Otherwise, this problem will be there. I can give an example where, of course, this is very important to understand how real this is. Suppose Immanuel Kant's Critique of Pure Reason is translated into an Indian vernacular, there will be disaster. Thing in itself, many of the technical terms used in Kantian philosophy are horribly translated into Indian vernacular. People will be totally misled. So this problem always arises when philosophical ideas and spiritual ideas are translated from one language into another language. The culture of the language, the syntax, all these will affect the translation. So translation will be frequently misleading. Thank you. Namaskar.
Raj, one last question.
Yeah.
If there are more questions, we'll continue in the evening after the evening session. Go ahead.
Namaskar, Maharaj. Thank you for the wonderful lecture. I have one question. How can people who have lost their jobs in these times keep themselves aligned with the principles of Karma Yoga when they are rapidly sinking into extreme despondency?
Yeah. There is no need to sink into despondency because everything is changing. So very often when we face an unpleasant situation, we forget that just as a pleasant situation changes, so also an unpleasant situation also will change. That we frequently forget. So we become so over-focused with the unpleasant nature of the situation. And we forget that the unpleasant situation also may change and become pleasant, just as the pleasant situation changed and became unpleasant. So that will help us, once you understand this principle, that will help us to look at both from a higher perspective. If you don't mind, I want to, Mark is still there?
Yeah, he's still there.
Okay. Perhaps you can listen to some of our programs and lectures, Vedantic lectures. We frequently, I try to emphasize this point with quotations from different translations. To give an example, often Vedanta is highly misunderstood. Vedanta is frequently misunderstood as a system of philosophy which tells the world is not real, I am not here, this chair is not there, the computer is not there. It is totally crazy, really. That's not what Vedanta teaches. Vedanta teaches everything is here, but everything in this world is changing. The changeability, the relativity is what is emphasized and implied by the word Sanskrit word mithya, which is frequently translated as illusion, but the correct translation will be relativity or relative. Okay.
Yes, thank you, Swamiji.
Thank you.
I remember reading Swami Prabhupada introduction
Yeah.
to, and he does make a point in there about illusionary,
Yeah.
about meaning relative.
Yeah.
So I remember that now.
Thank you so much for raising the question. It is very important. Okay.
Yeah.
So we will continue the discussion at 7 p.m. This evening. Namaskar. Thank you. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.